So hi everybody. Thanks a million for joining us this afternoon. So my name is Adrian McCarthy and I'm the manager of the For Purpose Graduate Programme. I'm joined here today by Ava Harper McKeever, who's a graduate that we have placed in Social Entrepreneurs Ireland as a programmes assistant. And then we're also joined by Niall O'Sullivan, who's a mentor on the programme and also then works as a philanthropy consultant as well. So just before we kind of kick things off, I suppose I might just give an overview of the For Purpose programme for anyone who might be wondering a bit more about us. So essentially, For Purpose is a graduate programme for the not-for-profit sector. So we place graduates in all different types of not-for-profits into different types of roles as well, and we provide mentoring and training to graduates as they undertake their traineeships. So just to give a few examples of where we have graduates at the moment. So we have people in Focus Ireland, we've had people in Site Savers, and of course we have people in Social Entrepreneurs Ireland as well. And the graduates on our programme undertake a range of different traineeships in areas like communications, marketing, research and policy, finance, and other areas beyond that as well. So thanks again for joining us anyway, everyone today. And I suppose we'll be going through the topic of a career in the not-for-profit sector. So I'm delighted to be joined by two people who are very directly involved with the For Purpose programme as well. So I suppose, the first question I'd like to put out to the panel today is what motivated you to start a career in the not-for-profit sector? So Ava, we might kind of start with yourself, I suppose, just in terms of, what kind of sparked your interest in beginning a career in this sector?
Sure. So my degree was with NUIG and I studied human rights. So that was probably where it started. I think probably back when I was in secondary school, I knew that I had an interest in social justice and in equality. So I kind of knew that I wanted to kind of frame my career around something like that. So when I finished my degree, I went off and worked for a charity. And then after finishing that, I found the For Purpose programme as well. And now I'm working with Social Entrepreneurs Ireland. So I think I was basically looking at my values and looking at my ideologies and thinking, what do I really want from my working life? And I knew that I wanted to work with people, and I knew that I wanted to do something creative, and I knew that I wanted to be making a difference as well to society. A positive difference. So that's it.
Great, good stuff. And what about yourself, Niall?
Kind of linked but different, I guess, when I think back on it. I went to college in DCU and I came out quite a few years earlier than most people on this call. And to be honest, the philanthropy not-for-profit world really wasn't on my agenda whatsoever until about 10 years later. I had worked in a local development partnership company in South Wexford, but when I go back and look at it, I did marketing, I specialised in marketing in college, and I always remember reading case studies from pet food companies, Mars bar companies, where it was all about selling more, and it didn't quite sit with me at the time. I didn't really realise that it wasn't my thing, but I knew it just didn't sound right. It sounded interesting, it sounded good fun, but did I really want to be selling tons and tons of cat food for the rest of my life? Not really. And when, I think it was the mid-90s, Dale came to Ireland rather, and I had an opportunity to work in, say, a partnership company, which is all about supporting entrepreneurs and helping, I suppose, at a local level, grassroots level, or working for Dell and selling computers. I chose not to sell computers and to go into this space, which kind of led into the charity sector, not directly, but kind of led into the sector. So that's kind of my starting point.
Great, yeah. So I think what was interesting there is this, I suppose, that kind of, sense of purpose was maybe a factor for both of you in terms of wanting to kind of work in a career, kind of a sector where you kind of feel like your contribution or you're making a bit of a difference, I suppose, through your work. And, like you said there, Niall, it's not cat food kind of for the rest of your life, not there's anything wrong with it, but that there's kind of an overarching more of a kind of a meaning and I suppose kind of a purpose behind the work. So that's really interesting, and I suppose that kind of leads me on then to my next question, which is what do you find most rewarding about working in this sector, in the not-for-profit sector? So Niall, we might maybe start with yourself first on this one.
Well, I've worked very much on the fundraising. In the last 20 years or so, I've worked very much on the fundraising side. So for me, rewarding is when we get new donors across the line. When I worked in a philanthropy organization, we were trying to get families to establish family funds to basically become philanthropists in their own right. So for me, the biggest success moment was when we got a €7 million fund, which has since given out the interest earned from that fund. It's given out about 2 million over the years, and we'll give out a multiple of that over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years and beyond. So for me, it's getting people, I suppose, who maybe have the capacity to give at a higher level than they would previously have given, and to get basically to build more support for the sector in general.
Fantastic. And what about yourself, Ava, as a kind of newer entrant to the sector? What would you say is the most rewarding aspect for you?
Yeah, I think what Niall was saying earlier about selling Mars bars and income generated success. I think it's really interesting looking at the not-for-profit sector and seeing that at SEI anyway, Social Entrepreneurs Ireland, we don't measure success through income. We measure success through impact. So the impact that we make on society, and that the impact that social entrepreneurs make to people in society is how we measure if we're doing well. So I think that's really inspiring and really powerful. And I think that's the most rewarding thing in my role and my job, is seeing the actual change, the tangible change that comes through the work that these social entrepreneurs are doing. People like Food Cloud or Men's Sheds Association, or As I Am, the leading autism charity in Ireland. Like, there's just amazing work going on, and it's amazing to see the change that's having in society, but also to people's lives on the ground as well. So
yeah, so you can really see, I suppose, for yourself, Ava, the really direct impact of your work in SCI, because you've obviously, supported organizations like Food Cloud, which I'm sure a lot of people on the call would be familiar with Food Cloud as well, and the kind of difference that they make. So that's that kind of,
and they started straight out of college as well. Like, it was a graduate idea. So yeah, amazing stuff.
Yeah. And then just to go to yourself, Niall, for 1 second, to kind of just pick back up, I suppose, on something you said there. So, you've obviously had a long career in fundraising, but I think the perception of fundraising, sometimes it's not maybe the most well understood kind of part of the sector, or that people kind of think it's either, chugging buckets out in the street, or else, that if they see fundraising as the more kind of cold kind of face of the not-for-profit sector as well. So, in terms of that perception, what would you say, because we obviously do a lot of fundraising roles in the for-purpose program as well. So what would you say is the impact of fundraising and that kind of more, I don't want to say the more human side of it, but, the more kind of warm side of it, maybe?
Well, I think, it depends on the charity. The term charity is a catch-all, and like some charities get 95% of their money from government, and some charities get 95% of their money from fundraising. So if you're in the latter, or towards the latter end of that, towards the spectrum, which is a much higher percentage of fundraising, arguably fundraisers are the most important people in that organization. So you mentioned Sightsavers earlier on. Sightsavers in Ireland gets most of its money from fundraising. It gets some money from the Department of Foreign Affairs, but it is, I think, nearly every staff member in Sightsavers in Ireland is a fundraiser. There's a chief executive and a fundraiser, and they get support then from the office in the UK in terms of HR and finance and so on. So fundraising has become a profession. Like, nobody in my age dreamed of becoming a fundraiser when they were in school. It just didn't happen. You didn't think of it. It wasn't there as a profession. There's probably 1,000 plus fundraisers now. There was probably 100 when I started. So it's become a profession. The Charities Institute has kind of helped develop the profession as we've gone along as well. So there's now certificates, there's programs, there's courses in college that you can do, masters in philanthropy, or you can do your PhD on philanthropy, as a number of people have done. There's mentorship programs, like you've mentioned. I'm mentoring a couple of people at the moment in terms of fundraising, and it's a sector, it's an area that has changed in terms of there's new areas to fundraising, such as digital, there's legacies are becoming much more important. So it's an evolving area, but the fundamentals stay the same. It's people talking to people. It's like what Ava again was saying, it's very much a people-focused approach. So I think it's really interesting, and people have come to fundraising from such an array of backgrounds, some from commercial. Traditionally, a lot of retired bankers, early retired bankers moved into fundraising, not so much now. Some people move from PR and communications into a kind of event-based fundraising. And, you know, if you survive 3 years in fundraising, there's a good chance you'll stay in fundraising. If you leave in the first 3 years, as a lot of people do, you know, that you probably know it's not for you. But those who last the first couple of years will generally stay with it for a long term.
Okay, great. And I suppose I can see a few questions just coming in there as well. And one, I suppose, that might be kind of linked to what we were just saying there, is, are there any myths about the not-for-profit sector? So I suppose from, you know, either of your experiences, would you say that there's any myths or misperceptions or whatever you want to call it?
Well, I think there's a myth that charities maybe are small, are just small entities and volunteer-led. The top 200 charities in Ireland, most of them are very professional organisations. They are professionally run because they have to be. They're delivering serious programs. So I think if you take the small charity, yes, there's maybe 10,000 charities in Ireland, and there's maybe 200 to 500 which are, you know, seriously professional, fully professional, have volunteers as well, but all the main functions are managed by professional, fully paid individuals. So I think maybe some people in the wider domain forget about that, and they assume that anyone in the sector shouldn't be paid, that they should be there for the good of their health. And, you know, but it's only some people can do that. There are some unpaid chief executives out there, but they generally have a paid spouse or other income, you know, so.
Sure. Definitely. And I think that whole idea about unpaid internships and making your way into the sector, almost like a prerequisite that you have to do those beforehand. But to be honest, I think, you know, like you say, like it's not all volunteer led. It's there are many opportunities out there that are paid as well. So that might be a myth, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. And I suppose just another question that I wanted to put out to yourselves as well is, what would you say the greatest challenge that you've faced so far since you've started working in the sector would be? So Ava, you're obviously a bit newer to the sector, but I suppose, you know, maybe looking at it from, you know, kind of even from your traineeship kind of experience, what would you say has been the biggest kind of challenge you've had since you started?
Yeah, I think definitely this year anyway has been the transition and the adapting to working from home, which I wasn't expecting at the beginning of the year, like none of us were, I suppose. So I think that's been a big challenge, but also really, like, it worked really well in the end. It's a positive thing to see how our whole organization basically adapted to working from home. So that's been a big one. But I think as well, like when I was working in that charity, there's a big kind of risk, I think, when you're working with kind of you know, vulnerable people or vulnerable like issues as well, that there's a chance that you might bring your work home with you. So I think that whole thing of self-care and looking after yourself is really important. And it took me a while actually to realize that, and to kind of understand that, you know, if you bring your work home and you bring home those kind of concerns or issues, it's actually not good for the work that you're doing in the long run anyway. So yeah, that was a big one, but also the working from home thing as well.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and what about yourself, Niall? I suppose kind of greatest challenge that you faced in the sector?
I think, I mean, it was to do with the economy again. I mean, we're again looking at fundraising. Fundraising has held up reasonably well in COVID because people have adapted. And but going back to 2010, 2011, like we were at the foundation I was in, we were looking at larger, like high net worth individuals, but it's hard you kind of quickly forget how scared people were back in 2009, 10, 11, 12, even 13. and how unconfident people were to give away any money, let alone invest money. I mean, you couldn't sell a house back then, let alone, you know, and trying to find someone to give you $500,000 or $1 million for philanthropy purposes was quite a challenge. So I found that difficult back then. I wasn't bringing in much money. I felt bad about that. But in some ways it led me on to, I actually changed organization. I moved much more into the whole area of prospect research, and went to Trinity Foundation, where there was more regular, I wouldn't say it's easier to raise money there, but there was much bigger pool of donors, and a much bigger pool of donors at a very broad range of levels of giving as well. So, you know, it kind of worked out in the sense that I suppose I went into a new field because of it, and focused on the research side to a much greater degree than I had done.
Okay, yeah, so I think just interesting to hear that, because I think both of you have kind of maybe taken something away from those kind of challenges you've spoken about there. So, you know, that's kind of always been like a learning kind of thing for you. And I suppose another question then is if you could give yourself one key piece of advice when you were just after finishing college, and setting out kind of in looking for your graduate roles, what would that be?
Yeah, I'll go first if that's okay, Niall.
Yeah.
So I think the one thing I tell myself is to not be so hard on myself, and to really like not underestimate the experience that I had. So at the time when I first finished college, I kind of thought, you know, that I don't really have any skills. I don't understand why all of these jobs are asking me for 2 years experience minimum. And I'm just straight out of college and I don't know how to apply the things that I've learned. So I think, yeah, definitely not being so hard on myself, and also not giving up as well is a really big one, because yeah, I think it can be very demoralizing when you're looking for a job. And I mean, it's a great learning thing to do as well, like learning about yourself and writing your CV and writing a cover letter and all that. But then there are times when maybe you do send out an application and you spend a bit of time on it, and then you don't hear anything back at all. Not even a thank you for your application email. And I think that can be very demoralizing and can really have an effect on your self-confidence. So I think actually, if you don't get a response and an email back saying thank you for your application, I think it actually says more about the organization than it does about your application. It actually says more about their recruitment process. So it took me a while to realize that, and to just to never underestimate yourself and your experience. And you know, once you have a degree, then that's a really good first step in finding your career and moving on your journey. So yeah, definitely those two are really good, important ones for me.
I think that's a really good point you made there around kind of not underestimating your experience, because it's something a lot of people coming out of college face, and even myself, I remember back to not that long ago when I was looking for my first kind of role after college as well, you know, kind of thinking, you know, who's going to hire me? I have a general degree, I have a BA, and I think in particular for people who are maybe studying less specific kind of routes, a lot of people do face that.
Yeah.
And you know, I often say to people who are, you know, looking for tips in the recruitment process when they're coming out of college, don't underestimate the experience you have in even a part-time job. Don't underestimate the experience you have if you've been involved with a society or something like that in college, even, you know, something voluntary, even a sports club or something, if you've been on a committee or anything like that, because all of those are things that you can talk about in an interview process, you know, when they're asking you to give examples of your soft skills, which come up time and time again. So I think that was a really kind of good point you made there about, you know, not underestimating yourself. And it is hard. And, you know, I think in particular now in the time that we're living in terms of, you know, a time of COVID, it is more of a challenge, I think, for people coming out now. But I think, yeah, you know, in a really cheesy way, believe in yourself is kind of, you know, it's a way of using it.
That's it. Yeah, definitely. And I think you're totally right. And I was going to say the exact same thing. You know, those skills that you learn in college of, you know, working with people, or organizational skills, or if you were like the social night manager, or like social, what do they call it? Like committee member, where you're organizing all the social events. Like that's like a really big skill to have, you know, that's organizing people, that's, you know, corresponding with people. And even things like if you were a class rep, or if you were on the academic council, or any of those things, they're so important and good to have on your CV, because it shows that you have those skills, and they're transferable skills as well. You can transfer them to working too. So definitely,
Absolutely.
I totally agree. Yeah,
absolutely. And what about yourself, Niall, if you were to kind of travel back in time to give a piece of advice to yourself after college?
I can't really remember I'm not sure what advice I'd have given myself, but probably to do some of the same. I mean, when I left college, it was 20% unemployment. So it was actually, and probably youth unemployment was, God knows, 35%. I don't know what it was back then, but it was shocking. And a lot of people obviously emigrated. That's not an option at the moment, which is a big difference between now and other times. But I think what's important is that you get your career, you get your CV moving. And it's a bit like what yourself, Adrian, and Ava, you were saying. And things have a way of falling into place to some degree. To some degree you can direct it, and some degree there's luck. But I know my first job out of college was selling advertising, and it was 100 quid a week and possible bonuses. But and it wasn't great fun, but it helped me get my first, if inverted commas, proper job then, which was a €10,000 or £10,000 paid job 1 year, a bit like an internship. It was a placement through another entity. I got a year and a half from that, and it got me, that then in turn, helped get me the job in the local development partnership company. So things have a way of falling into place, but have some kind of a broad plan, but don't be too specific, I guess, in terms of where you'd like to go. But be open to opportunities, and I think if you can find opportunities where there's interesting people, be it a really strong boss, maybe someone you quite often see in chief executive profiles, for example. When I'm doing my prospect research, I often see this, that a chief executive who's doing very well now had a mentor, a boss at the time, maybe 20 years ago, who saw something in him or her and helped bring them along. Or maybe there was a teacher back in school who gave them a particular kind of focus or confidence, I suppose. So if you can do something in an organization where you're working with good people, the job or the piece of work you're doing doesn't have to be the best and most amazing piece of experience ever, but you're getting to meet more people, you're networking, you're putting yourself out there. Don't be shy about saying you're looking for work in this area or looking for opportunities in that area. And really, just try and keep the CV ticking along. Don't have too many gaps. It could be tempting to get 350 quid a week from COVID, but it's a gap in the CV. And I say there are volunteering, there are other options out there as well. So try and fill that CV as much as you can.
Yeah, I think that was a good point around just being open to different paths in particular, and kind of looking at maybe options you might not consider straight away. I know for myself, what I kind of imagined as my career path, maybe in my final year of college and when I was kind of coming out at the end of it, was maybe a bit different to kind of what I ended up doing. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I think I had a very specific kind of path laid out that I wasn't really maybe willing to kind of look outside it. But then, from looking outside, that's kind of led me down a really interesting route as well. So I think, kind of, keeping an open mind and maybe thinking about areas that might be, kind of look a bit interesting to you, and even investigating that a bit further is a good thing to do as well. So we're just coming up to the last 5 minutes there. So we had a couple of questions that have come in as well that I might just want to put out to yourselves. So someone has asked there, how would you suggest the best way to go about gaining work experiences from different charities? So I suppose, any suggestions for if someone wanted to build up their experience with charities, what would your suggestions be there?
Volunteering. Yeah, for sure. I'd start with that. And I think volunteering is great for your CV as well. And it's got amazing, like if you're working in let's say a charity shop, or if you're working with maybe older people, the skills that you pick up there are really important. I think probably networking, like trying to find your, like if you know anyone maybe in your direct network, like alumni from your college, or using LinkedIn maybe to connecting with people, even like your neighbors or your friends. Like you never know, there might be someone there that might just come out of the woodwork one day and have a chat and say there's a role here, or there's a role over in this other place as well. So yeah, those two are really good, I think.
Yeah, I'd say keep an eye out for short-term contracts as well. So the first fundraising job I had was a maternity cover contract. So it was 6 months, and I knew it was 6 months going in. And again, that led me on to, it kind of confirmed I wanted to stay in the sector. And that through a friend of mine had worked in a similar role in a not a similar charity, and had in the meantime gone on to work for a consultancy firm, and I ended up working in that. He had moved on at that stage, but I worked there. There's obviously websites like ActiveLink is worth keeping an eye on. It has both volunteering and paid for roles in a variety, not just in the fundraising, but in a much more broader sense within the charity world. And obviously Charities Institute Ireland has a career section there as well. Yeah, and obviously the volunteering side is, you can probably get into a lot of charities that way relatively easily.
So just seeing there in time, I think we have time for another 1 or 2 questions. Someone had asked there, what skills and qualities would you look for in an applicant for a non-profit that may be different than a for-profit business? So I might just comment on this myself, and then if either Niall or Ava want to come in on that. There's actually, I suppose, largely it's a lot of shared qualities actually are looked for in both non-profits and for-profits in terms of interview processes. Because it's a big focus for employers from, whether it's the not-for-profit, private, or even public sector these days, is on your soft skills. So what I mean by soft skills, because I know that can sound like a really generic term, but what I mean when I say that is, in every interview process for a graduate role, you're likely to be asked, to give examples of your communication skills, your presentation ability. Sometimes you might be given a task to do a presentation at the interview. You'll be asked about your time management skills, and if the role is maybe more of a technical aspect, you might be asked about your understanding of that as well. But generally, they're not going to expect you to be an expert in it, and that would kind of apply, I think, both in not-for-profits and in the private sector as well. I think the biggest difference would maybe be in the not-for-profit sector. What's really key for any organisation that we've worked with on the for-purpose programme is that people are able to demonstrate some, level of interest or insight into the not-for-profit sector, why they want to work in it, and then why that particular organisation is of interest to them as well. So, again, that could maybe be applied to the private sector, but I guess it's that kind of, sense of purpose aspect that maybe Ava and Niall were talking about at the start in terms of wanting to have a career where they could see their impact. That generally tends to kind of come up in the interview process. That might be one differentiation there. So yeah, I don't know if Niall or Ava, if you want to add anything to that question there.
I think, again, just from looking at my research hat on me again, if you look at people's CVs, there's an increasing number of people who've worked in both sectors. So you're not a charity sector person, or you're not a for-profit. Like I was reading yesterday about a guy who sold a business and made 25 million, but he worked in a fundraising consultancy in America, which was part of where he gained his knowledge of the world and of business in general. And you'll find quite a few people do move across the sectors. Obviously, if you're in the not-for-profit sector, the income potential may be less. It may be more reliable in some cases, but it may be less. So it's something to be aware of. But again, with the increasing professionalization, I mean, salaries are increasingly, they're fairly decent, but it's something to be aware of. But I think it's the same skills broadly apply. I mean, they shouldn't really be any different if you're a properly functioning professional charity. You have all the standards to meet, and quite often they're more professionally run and more empathetically run as well. So I think the likelihood is if you're a chief executive in a charity, you need to be more of an empathetic type of person than you probably can get away with more in the private sector, being more the shark type person, to be very, very black and white in terms of how I categorize people. But yeah, I think it's important to have that empathy with people.
Okay, fantastic. Now, unfortunately, we're nearly out of time. So I just want to ask one last question to both of yourselves. If you were to give kind of one kind of key piece of advice, one takeaway for any student or graduate who's kind of thinking about the not-for-profit sector or knows that they would like to work in it, what would that kind of one key piece of advice be? So Ava, we might go with yourself first.
Sure, yeah. I was thinking mainly on the line of like applications and making applications into organizations. And one thing that I would always say to people is ask for feedback. Organizations will always try at least to give you feedback. And if you're unsuccessful in an application and you get feedback, I think that's, especially if it's good feedback, I think it's really important for you to know maybe something that you can work on or something that you weren't aware of. Maybe like even could be the structure of your CV or the structure of your cover letter. You have both frozen there, so I'm going to, oh no, you haven't. You're moving now. But yeah, feedback, always ask for feedback.
Okay, perfect. And yourself, Niall?
I think, I mean, again, we say that the term charity is very a generic term, but within the charity world, there are so many spectrums, so many areas. So kind of, I think, don't go into a charity for the sake of it being a charity. Go into a charity that has, you have a particular interest in that area. So whether it be vulnerable women, whether it be the environment, whether it be, just, and everything in between. So maybe pick a sector where you feel it will be of personal interest to you. It may be that role will help you get into the private sector if that's what you want to do down the line. So, environmental consultancy that is a private organization may well value the fact that you work for an environmental charity or you volunteered for that environmental charity in times past. So I would go into look at sector by sector and where your skills match and where your passions are as well.
Perfect. Now, unfortunately, we're out of time. So I know there's a few questions there that I didn't get around to, so apologies about that. But just to note, we are going to be at the grad fair for the rest of the week. So I suppose, have a look at our stand and feel free to give us a shout at that. And thanks so much to both of our panelists as well for joining us. So thanks a million.
Thanks, Adrian.